Hi there, I'm Dr. Alessandra Latour, founder of the Latour Leadership Academy. For more than 16 years, I've worked with leaders across organizations to strengthen how they think, decide, and operate, especially in high pressure environments. This podcast is where we go beyond surface level leadership advice. We talk about the patterns, behaviors, and structural gaps that actually shape how leaders show up, and why capable leaders still get stuck. You won't find generic frameworks here. You'll find perspective, clarity, and the kind of thinking that helps you lead more effectively in the moments that matter most. If you're ready to lead with greater clarity, discipline, and intention, you're in the right place. Let's get started. Let's talk about what actually happens inside organizations when pressure hits. And I don't mean just global economic uncertainty. Sometimes it's more predictable than that. Q4 rolls around, budgets tighten, leaders start looking at EBITDA targets, and suddenly conversations shift from growth to cost. This is when you start to see it. Not new leadership behaviors, but amplified ones. Pressure doesn't create leadership habits, it reveals them. Under pressure, some leaders become reactive. They move faster, but not necessarily better. They add more meetings, more check ins, more urgency. Priorities start shifting weekly, sometimes daily. Decisions get made quickly, but not always clearly. And in an effort to stay on top of things, they actually create more noise than direction. There's research behind this. Studies in decision making under pressure show that when stress increases, leaders are more likely to rely on instinct and short term thinking rather than structured, strategic decision making, which means the exact moment that requires the most clarity often produces the least. But there's another pattern. Leaders who become more grounded under pressure, they don't ignore what's happening, they don't pretend everything is fine, but they slow down just enough to ask better questions. What actually matters right now? What are the few priorities we need to protect? What decisions cannot wait and what can? Instead of adding more activity, they reduce it. Instead of increasing urgency across everything, they focus it where it counts. And that difference shows up quickly in teams. When priorities are unclear, teams don't speed up, they stall. Research consistently shows that role ambiguity and shifting priorities are two of the biggest drivers of performance decline and disengagement in teams. Not workload, not even capability, uncertainty. I experienced this dynamic very directly during one of my own layoffs. At that point, it was actually my third layoff in 3 years, so my reaction was different, let's say, than it might have been the first time. I remember sitting in the conversation, hearing the decision, and thinking, all right, this is happening. I know what comes next. There wasn't panic. There wasn't resistance. It was just clarity. What do we need to do in between now and my end date? What needs to be documented? What needs to be transitioned? What will someone else need to pick up? But what stood out to me wasn't just my reaction, it was my leaders. She was staying in the organization, although it ended up being temporary, but she was clearly struggling with the decision. She kept apologizing over and over. And I remember trying to bring the conversation back to something more grounded. Not because her emotion wasn't valid, but because it wasn't helping us move forward. I kept asking, what do you need from me so you can run this function without me? What should I prioritize before I go? What will make this easier for you operationally? I was focusing on stabilizing the work. She was focusing on processing the emotion. And both of those things matter. To be fair, her response came from a place of genuine care. The challenge wasn't empathy. It was the ability to transition from empathy into operational clarity in a moment that required both. But only one of them actually helps the organization move forward in that moment. That's the distinction. Mature leadership under pressure doesn't eliminate emotion. It just doesn't let emotion drive the operating system. In moments like this, leaders aren't choosing between empathy and execution. They're responsible for both. Teams are watching closely in these moments. They're not just listening to what leaders say. They're watching how decisions get made, what gets prioritized, what gets protected, and what gets avoided. And those signals shape behavior quickly. When leaders become reactive, teams become hesitant. When leaders become unclear, teams slow down. But when leaders stay grounded, even in difficult situations, teams find stability inside the uncertainty. And this is where many organizations unintentionally make things worse. Instead of narrowing focus during pressure, they add more initiatives, more expectations, more urgency across everything. But here's the reality. You cannot create clarity by adding volume. Strong leaders understand that pressure requires discipline, not activity. They reduce the number of priorities. They clarify ownership. They make fewer, better decisions. And they communicate those decisions consistently. At the end of the day, leadership maturity isn't tested when things are going well. It's revealed when they're not. If you're navigating a high pressure moment right now, ask yourself, are you adding activity or creating clarity? And what would it look like this week to remove one competing priority so your team can focus on what actually matters? If this episode resonated with you, share it with another leader who's navigating complexity right now. These are the moments where leadership habits don't just show up, they define the outcome. Thanks for joining me today. If this episode challenged your thinking, that's the point. And it's exactly the kind of work we continue beyond the podcast. You can explore more at latourleadershipacademy.com, where I share leadership programs and resources designed to help leaders translate insight into sustained behavior change. And if you're not already subscribed, join our weekly newsletter at authenticleadershipunlocked.com. It's where I go deeper on the patterns shaping leadership right now and what most people are missing. Thanks for being here. I'll see you in the next episode.